In this video, we talk about what is wrong with Mother Africa. Where is Africa heading towards to? Does Africa know its direction? This is your favorite show, Final Voice, and we talk about things that we can do as a people on the planet. We look at Africa, Asia, America, Australia, and any place that we can talk of. What is wrong with Africa is what we look at. We're talking about the emerging economies in Africa, their biggest challenges or problems and solutions. This is Final Voice. I'm going for a break. When I come back, Mr. Mitchell Mahachi, your favorite guest, talks about Africa, or countries in Africa and their challenges, and what they can do moving on as a people of the continent. I'll be right back.
Viewer, kindly like this video, subscribe, hit the notification bell to receive.
So welcome to the show, Mr. Mitchell.
Thank you.
Our viewers so far has come out with some commendation that you really coming out with some spot on comments, and they are so apt as we want to develop Africa and the world. So we're talking about emerging economies in Africa, their biggest challenges or problems, and the solutions. On this channel, we profess solutions and not just talking about the problems. And that is why we are so fortunate to be watching Final Voice show. So what do we say about emerging economies in Africa?
Thank you, Charles, and it's a pleasure again to be on the channel that you have actually put together, that we can actually be talking about these issues that we have in Africa. And there is no better place to start off when we talk about problems than to start off with our stomach. And we realize that the food security issue is the biggest challenge that we actually face in Africa. And we realize that we actually import most of our foodstuffs from various countries, including places like Asia, where we actually get our rice. And I just read an article just last week where they were talking about the ship that was coming from Ukraine loaded with grain, and Africa was anxiously waiting for this ship. And in my view, I think Africa should be the one sending ships to Ukraine, because they have a challenge. So maybe when we talk about the solutions to these food security problems, the focus should actually start on the big three. I call them the big three, and these are cereals, pulses and oils, because this is where the diet actually comes from. And we know that if you do not have enough food, you are going to have children that are born and they will have stunted growth. And stunted growth has the problem that the future generation that comes after this generation with stunted growth will have like mental difficulties. And then how are they expected to then stand up with the rest of the world in terms of development? So this is the starting point. And so we need these big three to be looked into, so that we have enough cereal, we have enough pulses, we have enough oils. So this is the focus which the government should actually put.
Yeah, so in this context, you're talking about food security.
Yes.
And food security always comes in two dimensions: the food availability and food affordability.
Yes.
So there could be food, so much that we can contain, that is availability.
Yes.
But what about the issues of affordability? Can people buy what is being produced? And as you touch on food affordability, you touch on post-harvest losses.
Right, so when we talk about the affordability, so we actually start with the production. So if, in my view, if we actually have it in abundance, you will find that also the prices kind of tend to come down. So we notice in places like Europe, where they have like huge production of milk, for instance. So you will find that many people can actually afford milk products, yogurt, cheese, etc., etc. So the consumption tends also to be higher, because then it is available and it is also affordable at the same time. So in that aspect, production, and then we also talk about affordability.
So production must match prices of food.
Yes.
If the food prices are so high, consumers wouldn't be able to buy food.
Exactly.
And food security cannot be achieved in Africa. So the first point Mr. Mitchell raised was about food security and how we can produce and feed our own people on the continent.
Yes.
Africa. What is the biggest problem with Africa? Africa's emerging economies, their biggest challenges or problems and solutions. What else do we touch on?
Right, you had mentioned this aspect of post-harvest losses. So this is another challenge that we actually have. Whereas we talk about food production, we want to ramp up the food production. But we also have the problem that there's this analogy we use in my language, where there is a basket that is a hole at the bottom, and you continue to put things inside and everything is getting outside.
There is like a basket with a hole at the bottom.
Yes.
And once you pour in liquid,
yeah,
it must come out.
It's just coming.
And that is the picture of Africa. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, with regards to post-harvest losses. So what we are saying here is we probably have enough grain, right, that we have produced. But we actually experience losses of, I remember in one paper that I read, post-harvest losses of cereal that are as much as up to 5 billion per year in Africa. And this is quite a huge amount of money that we are losing. So we also need to
Can you quote the amount again?
It should be around $5 billion.
$5 billion?
Yes.
Africa loses almost $5 billion to post-harvest losses a year. And nations like Ghana have to spend close to $200 million to import rice. About $200 million to import rice. What is wrong with Africa? Emerging economies, their biggest problems and solutions. Continue.
Yes, so once this post-harvest loss is actually looked into, because you would find that we are also importing almost around the same amount in terms of value for the other agricultural products. So if we can actually stem this problem of post-harvest losses, I think we can move closer to food security.
Yeah, so as we mentioned food security, can we talk about or link our discussion to raw material dependency as a continent?
First of all, I was thinking maybe we could come to that, yes. But I was also thinking about that we could also talk about ramping up our production in agriculture linked to irrigation, for instance. Because right now, most of our farmers actually rely on rain-fed agriculture. So with the projections of climate change, where we notice that we have erratic rainfall, so we need now to invest in our irrigation systems, so that the farmers do not rely on rain agriculture.
So there should be some strict measures on irrigation in Africa when it comes to agriculture. As we talk about food security and post-harvest losses, he also mentioned irrigation. One key aspect of agriculture. If we want to produce more, our farmers cannot depend solely on rain. What do we touch on as a people of the continent?
The other issue, Charles, that I'm thinking is we could talk about producing more and stuff like this, but we also have another challenge that our population is really surging. And we have right now around, the projections are about 22 million student population. And like this is the future generation of parents to come.
22 million student population?
Yes.
So how do we feed these people?
So, yes.
How do we get jobs for these people?
Yes.
Are things that we need to look at as a people of a continent.
So whilst it's a very difficult topic to touch on, to say, ethically, who is qualified to say these are enough children, it's a really debatable topic in Africa. But I think somehow we need to have this interaction where we talk about population. Because without some sort of control on population, definitely we have a challenge with regards to food security.
Yeah, so let's talk about the raw material dependency as a continent.
Right, so with regards to raw materials, I'll give you an analogy, Charles, so that you can really understand the depth of the problem. So one time I'm looking at the production of manufacturing of cars, for instance. And I actually noticed that cars are actually made from, the body is actually made of aluminium.
The bodies of cars are made from aluminium.
Yes.
And Ghana produces aluminium.
Yes. So to make the vehicle go lighter and so less consumption of fuel, so they use aluminium. So we have countries like, you say Ghana, we also have Guinea. That are also into this bauxite mining. So bauxite per ton is only around $53 per ton. And you need 2 tons to make 1 ton of aluminium. So that, let's say you need 160, just say $110 for argument's sake to make 2 tons of aluminium. And then with this aluminium now that you have produced, 1 car, you only need 150 kgs of aluminium to make 1 car. So we are saying roughly from your 1 ton of aluminium, you can make 6 cars. Now, we started with $53, which is the one that is being left in Guinea, right? And now we have 10 cars that are coming out from 1 ton. And then we are saying the value of 1 car, roughly here in Europe, probably is around 50,000. So imagine that we started off with $53, that is the money that was left in Guinea. And then the money that is coming from that same $53 is now 50,000. So you can see where we are headed to. So you look at how much tons of bauxite you need to sell so that you can buy 1 car. You see, but yet...
so it's like we are producing the raw material, what is needed to produce the car, and we sell them at a very cheap price to the car producers, or these big guys or big nations that manufacture cars. And when they manufacture the cars, they sell these cars at a very high prices. I mean, you need more of this bauxite to purchase 1 car.
Just 1 car.
But who produces the raw material? Africa.
Exactly.
Yeah. So viewers really appreciate your analogy, and they would like to hear more.
Yeah, so what actually Africa needs then is kind of a win-win situation that, okay, fine, we understand the raw material is coming from Africa, because what happens when we remain with this $53 that we spoke of, we also remain with the impacts of the environmental impacts of this mining of bauxite. So we are left with poverty. We are also left with the impacts, the environmental impacts of mining bauxite. So what we now need is a win-win situation where we can then recover from these impacts, and also at the same time we now talk about say employment creation, etc., that we actually do not have currently.
All right. So it's about food security. It's about how we don't depend solely on raw materials, but how we can add value to these raw materials before we export them. Or it's about how we turn our own raw materials into finished products. If aluminium is needed in producing car, then why can't we produce cars? If the engine of cars are being made of aluminium, then what is Africa waiting for? Why can't we produce enough food to feed our own people, the young generation? We have the resources, we have the land. We can go into proper irrigation to produce more. We can also talk about how we manage post-harvest losses. How do we store food for the future generation? This is Final Voice. We're looking at Africa's emerging economies, their biggest problems or challenges, and the solution. I'm going for a break. I'll be right back. So we are back on the show. Africa's emerging economies, their biggest challenges and the solution or the way forward. So, food security, raw materials dependency, and agribusiness are the issues to look at, in the first place. So what do you have to say? How do you conclude on agribusiness, raw material dependency, and food security?
Right, so the thing with agriculture currently in Africa is that there are a number of structural issues that you look at when you are talking about agriculture in Africa. So the first thing is that the majority of people who actually are engaged in agriculture in Africa are in rural areas. And the majority of people in rural areas happen to be elderly people. So the first thing that we actually notice there is that we have a challenge there, because the elderly people are the ones mostly involved in agriculture. So what we need to do is we need to bring the youth into agriculture. And that brings us to another problem again, which is financing.
Financing the youth?
Yes. So for agriculture then to move, we actually need financing. And that is actually something that is not available currently in Africa. If the financing is available, you actually find that most of the interest rates are very prohibitive for you to go into agriculture. So we actually need interest rates that are actually below 10%, so that you can actually go into agriculture. And currently, you find in some countries the interest rate is as high as maybe 30, 40, 50%. And that is actually very difficult for you to invest.
To even borrow money?
Yes.
If you can't borrow money, how do you invest? So let me listen to you.
Yes. So we actually need financing in agriculture, and then one other thing that we actually find so that we actually get to the agribusiness, because first we actually need the production.
Yeah.
Then we get to the business.
Yeah.
So whilst we are still looking at the production, we also have the extension services, or we can actually say the competence. Because what is happening now is that people are farmers by default. You are just into farming probably because you don't actually have a job and you think farming is the easiest thing to do. And this is actually why probably the majority of people don't actually have the skills for them to be actually be termed as farmers. So we actually need our graduates to come and assist our farmers as one starter. And so we change this narrative within agriculture as like it's for people who are really like not educated or something like that. And
so what about graduates that even finish university and these graduates have good project work or thesis that could help us produce more? I'm saying this because you mentioned agribusiness or agriculture in the big context. Can't we fund these graduates with good project work or thesis that talks about how we can produce more food or add value to what we already produce? I'm linking this to the supply chains or the value chain of African products. It's still about how we add value to what we already produce, or how do we produce more to feed the generation yet to come or the current generation. It's about the coffee and cocoa. How do we add value to the cocoa and coffee before we even export them? And in another context, how do we add value, or how do we turn the cocoa and coffee into finished products before we export them? Imagine we have Ghana chocolate or chocolate coming from Nigeria, which has a big market in Europe. Don't you think this can fetch Nigerians enough money? Are you getting me? This is my point. So we've mentioned food security. We thank you so much for I'm talking about food security. You linked food security to post-harvest losses, and now you were talking about agribusiness, and you also mentioned raw material dependence, how we can add value or increase the price of our raw materials before we even sell them to car manufacturing companies. You came out with this analysis of car manufacturing companies and the price of bauxite in Africa. We thank you so much. So what do we talk of now? I'm looking about how financial institutions can help graduates or the people in the rural areas so that they can go into massive or something big when it comes to agriculture. And what else do we talk about?
Right. So in this now that you actually, because I've toyed about with this idea for quite a long time, and I actually think that we actually lack a little bit of innovation in this regard, because when we also talk of business, it's all this agribusiness we're talking about is also connected to employment creation at the same time. So you'll find that there is a lot of situations that we actually have within the agricultural sector in the value chain. I'll give you an example. I was looking at cattle diseases, for instance. So we have quite a number of cattle diseases that are affecting cattle or livestock in our in our area, right? And we also have graduates who have also completed their studies in agriculture. And these people are also complaining that they do not have jobs. So I was thinking of this just a simple business that someone can do, where they actually, because they already have the knowledge on how to, let's say, cure some of these diseases or even prevent them in the first place. Why not just create your small company that goes to various farmers and you just charge a small amount of money, right? So that it keeps going. You bring in the technical expertise, you have a group of farmers so that they can be able to pay you up the service that you are offering. For example, just dipping services, because normally people are relying on the government for dipping services as what was happening before. But because now governments are saddled with huge debts, etc., they are no longer in this position to be offering this service. And the farmers are now failing to have their livestock dipping at regular intervals. And now the disease keep coming. So we have a graduate with a knapsack sprayer, just a simple knapsack sprayer. You have like 10 farmers or 5 farmers with I don't know how many cattle they have. You charge, let's say, 20 cents or whatever amount for each livestock that you spray. And things move. This is job creation at just a simple level, right? So we have this innovation that I'm talking about. But also on the other hand, you also need, you were talking about cocoa, for example. Sorry, I'm just touching on the various...
Okay. Final voice viewers cherish you so much. So mention coffee, mention cocoa, mention whatever fruit that you want to mention.
So for us then to have this production or the value chain with for example, a look at cocoa, a look at the other products that we grow. So we actually then need to focus on agriculture at smaller scales. So we have, we call them small to medium enterprise. So the machinery that we are now talking about is not the large scale machinery, but it's for the small scale farmer, the small scale entrepreneur. And this equipment can be bought from countries like India at very affordable
China
prices. In China as well, we have these now. So once we have these the technology, we can then come, we process this cocoa into powder, we then start to make this chocolate that we are talking about, and the other products that we can also make. Let's say, for example, I'll give you cotton. Cotton currently sells probably around 20 cents per kg, right? And we have farmers selling their cotton at 20 cents a kg to places like China, etc., etc. And now you find that we actually import clothes, yet we are manufacturing, we are producing
the raw material
cotton, and we are proud. No, this is from China, this is from wherever it is, you know? But we are the ones who made the cotton, sold it for 20 cents, then we buy the clothes. I don't know how much it is.
So in the end, the apparel or the clothes comes on market, and our mothers can't even buy the apparel.
But there is very affordable equipment that we can buy from, say, China, which can separate the lint from the cotton, and then we can also then make the cloth and produce our own clothes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So the way forward is how we focus on agribusiness or agriculture. We make agriculture so attractive or lucrative in Africa. The way forward is about food security. How we produce more food and how we make sure people can afford food. in Africa. The way forward is about how we manage post-harvest losses. The way forward is how we give loans to people who would like to go into agriculture, like young graduates, like people in the rural areas. The way forward is about how we add value to the cocoa, to the coffee, to the bauxite, to the cotton that we produce. Let's link this to job creation, technology, and employment. Job creation, or employment and technology in Africa.
Yeah, so what we are saying is, from this example that I gave you of the clothes, we are actually selling our employment to countries like China, for example, right? Because they are now making these clothes, which we're supposed to have been employing someone here in Africa making these clothes, right? So what we simply need is that we have the technology, right? To have our youth, so that they are engaged in these value addition of different crops that we are making. So it could be cotton in this case, it could be cocoa in another place, you know, all the various crops that we are growing. If we just have the small machinery to start off with, right? And with this small machinery, a group of youth are now employed in this sector, right? So this is the kind of relationship that we can have. Yeah,
so still on job creation. And employment. What do you say about employment creation or job creation? I mean, this is very essential, very key to these emerging economies in Africa.
Right. Yeah. So I was just checking the the unemployment rates in the various places in Africa, and I think one publication says that the highest unemployment rate in Africa is in South Africa, where like 34% of people are actually unemployed. And I know also in my country we have this similar challenge. A lot of people are similarly unemployed. So what has happened, or the tendency that is currently in place, is that people, when the elections come, the politicians are promising people the government will create employment, the government will create employment. But you realize that it's not quite like that in other places where we have lower unemployment rates, because the role of the government is not particularly to create employment, but to create an environment which enables businesses to thrive and then create employment. So we are actually looking at it from the wrong end of the stick.
And it could also be the capitalist approach, because the capitalists believe that I can create jobs for you, but I come out or I make sure you have enabling environment. But to the socialists, they think the state can own enterprises or companies to employ people, as it used to be in the 60s, 70s, in Russia, in China, in Africa.
Yes, but the problem with this is that we have seen that most of these are now like state monopolies, and they are not so efficient in the way they are run. So this is we actually then limit the amount of employment that we can create, because we have inefficient institutions that are controlled, state controlled. Yes.
Yeah. So job creation is essential in Africa. We link job creation to technology.
Yes.
Provide basic technology, and the youth or the people who will not be unemployed.
And
what else do you add?
I had another point, which is kind of different from technology. I was thinking that we have a number of problems that we have in Africa, which might not necessarily require technology. For example, we are talking about problems such as soil erosion, just to give an example. And it's a minor problem to many people in their minds. But the problem with soil erosion is that we are actually losing money from soil erosion, because all this soil that is being washed away into the rivers, into the seas, and whatever dams, all this is money, because we are losing the topsoil. And the topsoil then equates to the money that was supposed to have maybe grown crops, good crops on the fertile soil.
I get it.
Yes. So we are losing this money. Now, we could then have our youth volunteer, and then maybe through a government-private partnership, see that we have programs where we employ youth to rehabilitate our areas which have been degraded.
The soil, the landscape.
Exactly.
Afforestation.
Exactly. And when they are doing this, you know, they gain skills. At the same time, we are also, you know, repairing our land.
So when we talk about job creation, we're not talking about the youth sitting in offices alone.
No.
We're not talking about white-collar jobs, like be in suits, as many of them would like to be.
Exactly.
But outside, the government can just look at the environment and create jobs from that. Those who have to go and repair roads, those who have to go and plant trees, those who have to go and prune trees, those who would like to go and even clean government institutions like cleaners or what have you, as is being done elsewhere in America, Europe, and what have you. We're going for a break. When we return, Mr. Mitchell tells us more about the way forward to Africa's challenges or problems. So, welcome back, viewers. I'm still here with Mr. Mitchell, your one and only guest on Final Voice Show. What else do we say about employment and job creation or technology?
Yeah, so Charles, one other thing that I also was burning to say is that you mentioned this aspect of people thinking about employment as the white-collar jobs. So this is what we have kind of tended to think for quite a long time. But I think this has to change. And one way that we can actually change that is through vocational skills training. And with vocational skills training, we can actually see that
the technical vocational education.
Yes.
So training.
This actually helps then our young people so that they can be self-employed and they can actually work from almost any part of the country. You know, you can be building, you can be welding,
mason, painting,
exactly,
carpentry.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of things could be done.
Exactly. But what happens now, you need the skills so that you can actually do it in a perfect way. Because now we also have a challenge where people just then become a builder from nowhere and they are constructing houses which are also not up to standard. So once the skills are there, then we can actually...
So we need to provide the skills to the youth.
Yes.
So technical vocational education is also essential as we talk about job creation and employment.
Yes. So the next thing then is, you see, the whole thing is intertwined, Charles. So what happens once we are now talking about, you know, these vocational skills that we are now talking about, it reminds me of a scenario where we are saying, okay, the world is now moving away from fossil fuels to renewable energy. And then the moment we say this, we now say, okay, all the cars need to have, let's say, electric batteries, but we do not have the electricity. So now the next thing that we need to talk about is the infrastructure for all these various things that we have been talking about. And so in regards to infrastructure, it now touches quite a lot of things. Because then when we talk about infrastructure, we now look at the markets, for example. Do we have adequate roads to get to the market? I remember at one place that I was working, so there was a farmer that he was producing eggs. And he was complaining that every year he loses a lot of eggs because the road is bumpy. And then when he's going to sell the eggs, they actually crack. And then they now fetch lower prices. So we actually now look at the infrastructure from whatever level that we are talking about, the local level, the international level. We actually need roads, for instance. So the road network, we also need our communication network, because now we are now talking about selling things online. The moment we say online, we are now talking about electricity.
Electricity, internet, all these forms part of the infrastructure.
Yes. So we now need to work on this infrastructure for the road network, for our communication network, and this is something that I think...
The rail network.
The rail network, yes. So
it's about time Africa looked into that. How do we have good train stations or trains working in Africa?
Yes. So
how do we connect Zimbabwe to Ghana?
To Ghana, yes.
Rwanda, South Africa, Algeria, Ethiopia should be connected with the rail network.
I was looking at one example, sorry to drag a little bit, but I was looking at one example to concretize this aspect of infrastructure. Look at a country like Congo. So for you to travel within Congo, you actually notice that the time that you spend from one place to another is very huge because of this challenge within the transport network. So this is something that governments really have to look into. Sometimes we don't even have a simple bridge that connects this community and the next community. So it actually affects a lot of trade in that aspect. So we have ports, we have roads, all these require huge amounts of money. And for us to get the investments that we actually need, so a lot of case studies, feasibility studies have to go into this, because we also do not want to have white elephant infrastructure, because this is another challenge we have. Sometimes we actually take loans, we construct, let's say, an airport, and like what happened in this scenario, we actually took a lot of money to be constructing airports at this time, and what happened? COVID hit. Fine, we didn't know COVID would hit, but these are some of the risks that you also want to look into, because then no one is coming at the airports, but you have to be financing the loan. So these are some of the challenges that we face.
So you hit on infrastructure, and in your conclusion or last submission, I realize you mean we shouldn't take loans for anything. When the loans are taken, we need to invest them into productive sectors or something that can generate money or employment for the youth. We're looking at countries in Africa that have borrowed huge sums of money to build parliaments. Some borrow huge sums of money to build something that is counterproductive. Roads are needed, rail networks are needed. Like to be in commerce now, you need something like e-commerce. So how will people trade on the internet? So we need internet in Africa. We need good roads and what have you. After finishing vocational training schools, where would they be? They need technology and infrastructure. What else do we touch on?
Yeah, we touched, I think, energy was part of infrastructure.
So the energy, we look at not only about fossil fuel, right? We look at renewable energy.
Yes.
Renewable energy, something that Africa is lacking now.
And we actually are blessed with the sun, Charles, that almost more than 200 and something days of continuous sunshine. So we actually need to harness this energy that we have in that regard. And what I actually think is one way in which we can finance this is the citizens themselves doing this. So this is a topic that I'm really passionate about, that sometimes we look forward for investors, yet we have people who need the electricity. They can actually probably have their own investment and just need a little bit of financial assistance, and then they produce their own energy and consume it as well. So that is on this part of energy.
Yeah, so aren't we funny people? Because as far back as in the 50s and 60s, Ghana's former president had brought nuclear reactor or had the idea to manufacture nuclear reactor. And the history has it that some people in Ghana thought Nkrumah wanted to control West Africa or Ghana, like some kind of anarchy. Like I wouldn't want anybody to become president even if I'm gone. So I want to bomb Ghana, or whoever tempts my government, I'll bomb that person or destroy that person. People didn't have the idea of nuclear energy that time. But this man thought of nuclear reactors, even as in the 50s. Yeah, so Africa really needs nuclear energy, renewable energy like hydrogen energy, like the solar energy you mentioned, like the biogas energy and what have you. We're going for a break. When we return, we'll tell you more about how we solve Africa's problems or challenges. I'll be right back. So, welcome. You have mentioned a lot of solutions. We've professed a lot of solutions, or we've come up with some proposals for the African continent. What else do we talk about?
Right, the next thing, Charles, that we can talk about is we actually need to be talking about education and the attitudes of people on the continent. So with regards to education, what we are talking about is, I think we mentioned earlier that the population, the student population that we have currently is approaching around 22 million. But
student population in Africa alone?
In Africa alone, yes. And then with this student population, we actually now need to cater for it for the future. So the universities, the schools, all this needs to be catered for. And that's one direction that we actually need to be looking into. So maybe for us then to have this, we actually need to have probably partnerships between government and the private sector, so that we can actually increase the learning institutions, that all the young people can actually be adequately educated.
Yeah, but when you talk about education, should we always rely on formal education, or African can have its way, or go back to its informal education and still develop?
Well, that's an interesting question. But what actually guides education, I think, in my view, is the employer. What are the employment requirements? So as long as we can cater for whatever requirements that we have from the employer side, if we can cater for them informally or whatever way, I think with me it's fine. So long we are gearing towards, what product do we want to produce? Yeah, so that is the important thing at the end, because like right now we know that STEM education, the scientific technological education is what is important now, so that our children know the mathematics, the science, etc. And yeah, so that is with regards to education.
Again, on education, you think our schools, universities, are churning out graduates or products with the right skills?
Yeah, this is another thing that I actually think that there is a missing link in my view, that the institutions are not talking to the employers. Because from my experience, I remember we write these theses during the programs, and no one reads these theses, right? So it's just you producing knowledge which just ends up in some shelf. And the connection now, because all these theses have something to do with development, with manufacturing, etc., etc. But for them then to just lay in the shelves, it means there is a missing link. And that missing link is what I actually see in some countries here in Europe, where they actually take students, and these students are then connected to companies where they actually put these ideas to work, right? And now what happens? Just yesterday someone was telling me about, I heard this old lady complaining that we have our scientists, our graduates, all this time, but we cannot make a machine that can actually cook ugali. Is it ugali? Gari, yeah, a machine that just makes gari.
Just dry cassava, just grate the cassava and dry it, and it turns into food.
Yes, but now the machine that can do it whilst you sit in your, like what we do with the rice cooker. So that person was complaining, why don't our scientists also make these things, so that you can also be seated doing something else whilst your gari is being made by this machine. And we have a gari machine or something, I don't know what name you could give to it. So this is what we are talking about with this education.
So we can make gari machine, and producing gari becomes a bit easy.
Yes, you can even then export it to Europe, because you just give the instructions. Gari is made in 10 minutes, 5 minutes. What you simply do, switch on this machine, put so much gari, and then 5 minutes, bingo, you are done.
Yeah, like you get some hot water, your gari, and you get eba. And the people of Nigeria will be so happy to have such a machine.
Yeah.
So while somebody has been able to produce rice cooker, what can we do? Why can't we produce something to help make eba in 4 minutes or in 2 minutes? That is your point, right?
Yes, exactly.
I get it. So you've touched on education and the skills we need, and how we should train people for the job market.
Yeah.
What about attitude?
Right. With regards to the attitude, here now we have another serious challenge. So we can have all these things that we have talked about. We have improved food security, etc., etc., etc. But if the mindset that is not changed, you look at our work culture, for instance. We go to work, we are in the office, we are busy on WhatsApp, right? These are things, just simple attitudes that we have picked over the time. So people are not like time conscious and value for money, etc. The list is endless.
We are not punctual. We are not time conscious.
Yes.
That is one attitude that we're talking about.
And so when you now look at this, then grows into even something more cancerous called corruption.
Corruption.
Yes. So with corruption now everything just ceases. Yesterday someone was talking about a scenario where you want to invest in a country. You are told you have to know the president, you have to know his children, you have to know. It's a whole lot of people that we have to know. And all these people, you just don't know them. You have to be dropping money to each of these people, and it's actually reducing the amount of money that you need to invest.
It's like a chain.
Yeah, it's a whole chain.
You have to give money to these people before you can even put up a factory.
Yes.
In some countries in Africa. So how will you attract investors to come to your continent?
So you actually don't need to know anyone. You just need to have the money and the idea and the work. But it's not that simple. We now have a lot of things in the way, and so many projects have actually been turned away from various countries because of this.
This is a serious point. Even to come out with an NGO, you have to shake the monkey. Like, you have to visit people in the offices, about 10 people, for no reason. Because the DCE or the MC at the local level will like you to go to the regional level. The regional level, you have to meet about 2 or 3 people. Then from regional, you have to go to the national level. And even at the national, as you've met the minister, he wants you to go to the presidency. For what?
Yeah, it's a long chain.
To put down a factory. Let me know your rules and regulations when it comes to putting down a factory in your country. Where I need to hit and where I shouldn't hit as a manufacturer or producer or as an investor. That is all. But to move from the bottom to the up, or from the very up to the bottom, you have to bribe your way through. And that is scaling the drive of investment or investing into our own continent. So you mentioned punctuality and time consciousness. You've talked about bribery and corruption in that aspect of our setting. Yes. And what else? Our attitude, mismanagement.
Mismanagement, yeah, and so many things.
We lack the culture of maintenance. Africans lack the culture of maintenance. Buildings, you could go around Belgium, go around Holland, Germany. You see buildings that were built as far back as in the 1800s. Yeah. And they are still there. Factories built as far back in the 1800s. Go to America, you have manufacturing companies, warehouses built as far back as in the 18th, and they are still there. Yes. Elsewhere in Africa, if they don't use politics to destroy your company, they will use tribal war. Yes, somebody will just sit on radio or television and say, hey, this man belongs to this tribe or this ethnic group, and he thinks he's the wisest person or the smartest businessman. And right there, your business is almost ending. We need to change our attitudes. So we talk about education, and if you mention attitude, by attitude, we're talking about corruption issues, mismanagement issue, the lack of maintenance, punctuality, and time consciousness is what we need as a people. What last thing can we talk about so we end the show?
Right, Charles, we can talk about all these things, but I think we would have done a disservice if we do not talk about health. Because if you are not healthy, you cannot produce anything. So actually, probably we could have started with health, but I thought we could start with the stomach. But I think also
once the belly is filled,
you
can be assured of productivity.
Yes. So I think it's good that we also end with talking about health, because health is a critical issue in Africa, because it's also related to the life expectancy on the other hand. So we actually realized...
You mentioned life expectancy, and elsewhere in Nigeria, their life expectancy is 58 years. I'm citing Nigeria because they have the population to drive industrialization. They have the population to, at any time, just at the snap of the finger, get laborers to produce whatever they want to produce. So if the life expectancy in Nigeria is 58 years, that of Ghana is around 63 now. Many nations in Africa have less than 64 years. Aren't we spelling doom for ourselves? That just to hit on life expectancy.
Yes.
You can continue.
So with regards to health, I think my take on health is this. The majority of people, I think in Africa, we have established stay in rural areas. So this is where we actually need to have a focus on. And how to do this? We actually need to increase the investment in primary health care so that we reduce the distance that people take for them to reach a health facility. So increase health facilities in the rural areas so that everyone has adequate access for our pregnant women, because you also notice a lot of women are dying during childbirth, and this can actually be reduced.
Mortality rate so high.
This can actually be reduced by the number of health facilities in the rural areas. But
so it's not about getting a big hospital in the rural areas. Just a clinic or a check compound will be okay.
Because what happens with health, Charles, is once you are healthy, it means the sickness is actually dropped. So the moment that you actually maybe develop a sickness, you quickly have access to a health facility and they work on it. So we might not even need so much to be going there. Because look, our health is mostly the young people, right? Our population is mostly young people. And we know that the immunity of young people is high. So once we just have this primary health care, in my opinion, I'm not a doctor, but I'm of this opinion that we should work around this,
And the same health is linked to infrastructure.
Yes.
We need to get more hospitals.
Right.
Elsewhere in Europe and in China or in America, if you turn around in 10 minutes, if you travel for 10 minutes, you see a hospital, a health infrastructure, like, if not a big hospital, somewhere you can go and still access something like a hospital or a big hospital and everything. Why can't we have same in Africa? Clinics and hospitals or polyclinics. So health issues are linked to life expectancy and productivity. Why should we die young whilst we can produce medicine and hospitals? Why should we die young whilst we need the young generation to produce more or to be the laborers or the future workers of that continent? So this is what you're touching on.
Yeah, and probably the last point that I wanted to talk about with relation to health is that we actually have a serious brain drain in the health sector, because we actually have our nurses, we train them, maybe we take 3 years or whatever time to train them, and we have them now maybe going to other countries. Probably
it's abroad. A fact, they travel abroad.
Yes.
America, Europe, Australia, China.
Yes. So this is another area where we need to be looking into, where we actually need to have a mechanism to retain our staff, so that we are not training for other countries. We actually use a lot of resources for us to train nurses, only to lose them. So we need to have a mechanism to retain our staff so that they can then go to these places that we talked about.
And the doctor-patient ratio, let's say for Ghana, is so weird and sad. So if we train doctors and in the end they have to travel abroad.
Yeah, the ratio.
And service people. It's a sad situation. Let's see how we can retain these health workers, these doctors in our own countries. Let's fund them. Let's make sure they have they have good salaries, so they can give their best out as professionals. This is Final Voice, your favorite show. Africa's emerging economies, their biggest problems, and the solutions. We are done for today. Thank you for coming on my show. We will always rely on you when it comes to topics like this. You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Charles. It's been a pleasure.